Hello, my name is Richard Ettema. I'm with AEGIS.net. I'm the lead developer and senior architect for our Touchstone Testing Platform, specializing in testing HL7 FHIR. What I'd like to do today is go over a couple key features of the platform where we support what we call peer-to-peer testing, or external client to external server testing. Typically in testing, the platform itself will act as the client, but Touchstone also provides the ability for external clients to send requests and be captured and evaluated, just like the responses from the server. I'm already logged into Touchstone as our AEGIS demo account. I want to focus on not simply looking at a client test system as you might normally think, but where we want to simulate that client system using Postman as our tool. So a lot of information that we'll be going over is here in the online docs, just so you can go take a look at that when you're ready. So as I mentioned, I'm already logged into Touchstone as our demo account, and one of the aspects of doing peer-to-peer testing is knowing how to access the FHIR server through its proxy URL that we provide in Touchstone. So I'm navigating through our test systems that we have here in AEGIS, and I'm going to look at our WildFire 401 public server and its definition here in Touchstone. Basically, we define the base URL, give it a nice name, what FHIR specification we're supporting, but most importantly is when we execute a test from an external client and we want Touchstone to capture it, we need to not go through the base URL of the server, we need to go through the proxy URL. And so you'll see that essentially what we're doing is providing a substitution of the fully qualified domain name for the base URL and replacing it with our own, with a special port number that we're assigning to your particular server. So that's how we have a unique proxy set up in front of each FHIR server. So it's important for the client to know what that is when we're going to be going and doing some testing. And let's just go ahead and do that. I have Postman here, and I'm going to bring it up. And I've got two very simple requests that I'm going to be exploring, and they're just simply FHIR read operations. I've got one which is an open, meaning unsecured read operation, so just using simple HTTP. And then I have another one where we're actually going to be using HTTPS with OAuth level security for authorization, just to give you a sense of how that works as well too. Let's first start with the open. And normally we would go directly to the base URL of our WildFire server. And I can do that here. And Postman has a bunch of headers here, but the accept header is all I need for the read operation to indicate what the FHIR MIME type is and the encoding that needs to be done for FHIR. So once I've defined all that and I have my get URL where I'm going to go for a patient with an ID of example, and I'm just going to go ahead and send that to my WildFire server, and it comes back with that patient in the format I specified, XML, and there is the example ID that I would expect. So that's normally how we would do this. In Touchstone, though, we haven't captured anything. So what we want to do to make that capture happen is replace this fully qualified domain name that we normally go to with that proxy URL. So I'm going to go over here. I'm just going to capture that whole URL that Touchstone has gone ahead and replaced. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to replace it in my path for my get operation. And so now, by doing this, it's going to go directly into Touchstone, and then Touchstone will forward it onto the actual base URL for the FHIR server. So we'll go ahead and send this, and we'll see, we got a 404. Well, that's kind of an interesting response because I would expect to get back the patient as we did before. Let's go. We're going to go back into Touchstone to see what's going on. So we go back here to Touchstone, and what Touchstone is going to do is it's going to capture the exchange. So as long as we're sending it to one of the proxy URLs in front of a server, we will capture it. We click on the exchanges screen, and we can see that if we've executed by unmatched, there's a few different options here, but if we have unmatched initiated by a client, and we can actually clear that if we want to. But the idea here is that proxy URL that I sent. And you can see that we have an origin IP. And that origin IP is over here, invalid. Now, basically, it's not an IP that's registered with a test system, a client test system that we have here in Touchstone. So it's important that we go into our list of test systems, and I'm going to look at the client test systems that I have defined. And so I've already defined something we call demo postman. I'm going to click on this link, and the base URL doesn't have to be a resolvable URL, but we need to put something in here, so we can just dummy this up and say demo.aegis.net. But the important thing here is the IP address. Since it's not something that can be resolved, we have the ability to put in an IP address. This is important because I'm running this from my local laptop here behind my local ISP, perhaps with a VPN connection and so on and so forth. So I need to find out what that IP address. Well, I just saw it. If I go back to the Exchanges screen, it's right here. So this IP address, because I know that I sent to that proxy URL, is the IP being presented by my laptop right now through all the networking that we have. So I can take that and copy it, go back over to my test systems, demo postman, and put it in here. So once I save this, now it's going to have that IP address. And so Touchstone will now recognize that incoming IP address and attach it or assign it to demo postman. So let's go back to postman itself and run that again. Well, now when we send it, we get back our patient because Touchstone was able to resolve it. And if we go back to our Touchstone and look at our Exchanges screen now we're going to take a look at by my org. We can see demo postman was connected to that IP. And we have the request message that was sent, and we have the response that was sent back by the WildFire server. What this means is that Touchstone now is able to capture it and assign it correctly. And now we can actually leverage this in an actual test execution. Because you'll notice over here, no running test execution was found in order to match up this particular exchange. So the next step that we do is actually let's find a test definition. So let's go over to the test definitions area. And for the upcoming Connectathon event that we have here, we have a patient formal track where we have FHIR client and a patient read already defined. This particular test definition is set up where you can do either in a JSON format or an XML format. And since we're doing XML right now, I'll choose XML, and we'll do a create test setup. And now instead of the external origin being Touchstone, we can come down and choose our demo postman test client. And our destination is going to be our WildFire 401, open WildFire 401. We do have a secure WildFire that we can use later. Part of the definition of the test setup is going to be what is the patient resource ID that we want. So I'm just going to put an example because that's what we're using right now. When I click execute, now because Touchstone is no longer acting as the client, when it reaches an operation that would normally be executed, it's going to go into a waiting for request status. So we can click on the status and link down into the test script execution page here. And it's actually telling us exactly what it's waiting for. So it's waiting for a submission from this IP, and it's going to be to this URL, and it's going to be with this accept header. Okay? So that's actually what we're going to do now. We're going to go back and just simply run that again. Takes a little bit more time because it's now being evaluated by Touchstone, the request and response. But the idea here is from Postman, I still got the response I expected. But now within Touchstone, if I refresh the test execution, I can now see that it's been captured and evaluated. In this case, we have 100% pass. We can drill down into the details of the test execution, and we can see here's the read operation. where the origin is expected to be our demo postman and our destination, our Wildfire 401 server. We can expand and we can see here's the submitted URL that Touchstone captured, and here's the forwarded URL that it sent on to the actual base URL. All the accept headers and response headers and so forth. But notice the headers are all the ones that Postman sent. You'll also notice, because the Touchstone proxy is following the proxy rules, that we also have the X-forwarded headers that are being sent along. So we know exactly where this came from and where was forwarded to and so on. We can evaluate, again, normally as we might, depending on the complexity of the evaluation, we can see all kinds of assertions. But the important thing is that we can now associate this external client request to the server, and it's going through Touchstone and being captured. So this allows us to evaluate or assert on actual request portions, right? So we want to make sure the accept header and the request. We want to make sure that the content type was not sent because it's a GET operation, and so on. If there was a payload, if there was a body, we could actually do validation against the payload of the request as well, too. So this is just a simple demonstration of showing Postman sending a FHIR request through the Touchstone proxy so that Touchstone can then evaluate it. The next thing I'd like to show is if you have an OAuth capable exchange. So if we're using OAuth 2 for our authorization, it's essentially the same idea. What we're going to be doing is still capturing the FHIR request. Now that we know that we've got our demo Postman set up correctly, let's go take a look at our test systems, our servers, and we're going to find the OAuth capable FHIR server, which is right here. And so we just gave it a name with OAuth in it. And so the URL is just a little bit different. So it's going to secure FHIR 401. And you can see that the proxy URL is going to be a little bit different as well, too. So again, this is a different server. So it has its own unique proxy. I'm going to capture that, copy that. And let's go back to Postman and take a look at this. So again, here is our Wildfire that we would normally be going to, but I'm going to replace this with going to the proxy. Now, this is going to be an OAuth exchange. So within Postman, Postman is going to handle the OAuth authorization exchange. So what I've done in my GET request is I've gone to the authorization tab, I've indicated OAuth 2, and then I come over here and then I can see here's all the information I need to put in that's going to be configured for talking to my secured Wildfire server. So I've got the callback URL that it's expecting, the authorization URL, so we're using Keycloak as our authorization service, and then we have a client ID and a client secret that I've set up as variables, and they're going to be sent for the actual credentialing, if you will. So those will be sent in the payload of the authorization request. So from a Touchstone perspective, Touchstone isn't going to be doing anything from the authorization with the external client here. The external client is still responsible for doing all that work. So we're going to do a get new access token, okay? And we basically have a Wildfire user that we're going to send in, and to grab the actual password over here. Go, and we'll log in, and we can see that the authorization has now been complete. So we're authenticated, we'll proceed, and we have a token back. We'll use that token, and so Postman now takes that token and it's actually going to put it into the authorization header. Everything else about the request is going to be the same, where we send in the same MIME type for the accept. But now we've already been authorized, we've been authenticated, and we'll send this on, and you can see it worked. We now have our patient returned to us as we would expect. Let's go back into Touchstone. And now I didn't start a test execution, so we can go to the exchanges screen, and now we can see that we're sending from the same client, the demo Postman, because it captured that by the IP, but now we're sending to the OAuth server. Okay? No running test execution was found, so of course we don't have any pass or fail at this point. Well, we can do that. We can come over here and we can actually execute the same test, but we'll go to the test setup now, and this time we'll choose our OAuth server. We'll use the same patient resource and we'll execute. And this again is going to go into that waiting for request state. We'll drill down just so we can see what it's expecting. Okay, and there's the full URL. There's the proxy that we have set up. And so this is just going to sit and wait until it captures that inbound request. So let's go back. I don't have to do the authorization again because the token hasn't expired. So I'm just going to hit send again. And I get my patient back. Now when we come over here and we refresh, we can see that the read has been successful. Again, let's expand and let's just take a look. You can see now, here's that bearer token that we got back from within Postman. So you can see Postman is now sending all the correct things that we need because we've been authenticated, and we can now talk to our OAuth capable wildfire server. So this is just a nice example of, if you don't have an actual FHIR client, you can use Postman to simulate it and do that message exchange. So that's all I have for you at this time. Thank you for your time, and happy testing.